what if life is really more mind-blowing than we can imagine?
Don't do meth, kids. Yeah, heard it first here. People put too much emphasis on changing the world through politics when it seems like art really changes a lot of culture and politics more than people realize. It's like whiskey, sharing whiskey.
Right.
It's like not a thing you teach.
Yeah.
It's like, I like this. Do you like this?
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. Here we are again. We're back. We're at the Mansion at the Orchard, another venue. It's not just for weddings. And they were kind enough to let us use the space. Just wanted to do somewhere pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And every now and then someone will offer and say, oh, you can use like my little office. And think, I want it to be pretty.
Yeah.
It's got to be pretty. And we're covering finding meaning in film, which, let's be honest, this is just this is going to be a conversation, but it's more an excuse for me to get a platform to share my passion about movies. Cause you love movies just like anyone else.
I'm excited to hear what you have to say. You're
I'm
more knowledgeable
excited
about the process.
Well,
you're a director. I'm just a guy.
Yeah. Fair enough. But hey, I want to make the types of films that are for just guys.
Yeah. Okay.
One of my goals is to make it when I make films. I'm putting this out there. I'm not saying if.
Yeah.
When I'm going to do it.
I love it.
Is that films that my dad could watch and like, because he's just a guy.
Just a guy.
And same with my mom. Just that I think things that are universally appealing have a lot more power than some of the more artsy indie stuff. And I don't mind some artsy indie stuff.
Yeah.
But you gotta have a balance.
Right.
There's some things that are just too far out. We've also got this bourbon today. It's a rye. Rocktown Distillery here in Arkansas.
Baby.
It's
represent.
It's like 46%, so it's a little stout.
Yeah.
But I really like this rye. The first time I had it, I was kind of like, meh.
Mm-hmm.
But then it really grew on me over time because it's almost got like a cherry taste or something.
Peated Arkansas.
Yeah, peated
straight
rye
whiskey.
Thanks for bringing that up. I forgot. That's sort of a big point. Peated rye.
Right.
It's real interesting.
Oh, wow. It's got like a little sweetness to it.
Yeah, like it makes me think of cherry.
Yeah.
And
I like that.
Yeah.
Hints of pecan, maybe?
I've brought this on a lot of camping trips. It just is like a good camping whiskey.
Yeah, that's good.
And yeah, they're in Little Rock. Everything I've had from theirs has been good. Some of the flavor, I'm not really a flavored whiskey guy. Some of those I'm like, meh.
Yeah.
But all of their just, bourbons, ryes, that kind of thing are phenomenal.
What real men drink.
Exactly.
Take it from us.
Too much of an Irish purist.
Yeah.
Have you ever had an Irish margarita?
I have not.
It's just straight tequila.
Okay. Okay. Well, then I have.
Yeah, exactly. So I cough. I didn't have to. I did. I watched the IMDb top 100 movies, and I just finished that like a week or two ago.
Okay.
And so that's another part of the inspiration of why I wanted to do something on film. And that's something I started in high school and I was just kind of watching movies for a bit. It's more been the past 2 years that I've been more actively working on it. But I thought it'd be neat to just see a broad scope of what films have been deemed worthy by both critics and audiences. I really like IMDb. I think it's the best system. Rotten Tomatoes trash. That's a
shots
conversation
fired.
for another time. There's no consistency. I can never figure out.
Yeah, I usually do both and then take the average.
That's fair. I feel like IMDb is a good system because it synthesizes so well, like all these different, it's not, the critics can't get their heads too big and then the audiences have input. And I think there is value to if a movie is influential in culture, it deserves to be rated more highly. And so I just think it's a good system. And
well, that's why it's good to have this conversation because I am totally unaware of how either of those work. So it's good. Yeah.
Which ultimately, it's like, is a movie good or is it not?
Right.
It doesn't really matter what the rating is. And that's a subjective thing. But I think there is something, like I said, movies that are universally appealing, like number one on IMDb is Shawshank Redemption, which is just a great movie. It's just a great story about a person finding their way in prison, and it's not super artsy. There aren't all these deeper layers or super whatever. It's just a good story, and that's why it's number one. And I'm all about the story has to be the bread and butter. It can't be. There's some movies that are all allegorical, and you can have some of that, but if everything's representative so much to where it doesn't even tell a coherent story, I just think, what's the point of this?
Yeah. Or some movies can really trick you with the acting. You get in, you're like, wow, they've really like captured my attention. And then at the end, you're like, oh, they didn't tell a story.
Yeah. Things just happened for 2 hours and now it's over.
Yeah.
And, so first off, before I jump too much into some of the IMDb 100 reflections, but I just have to make my case of why I think film is the greatest art form.
Okay.
And it's because it's inclusive of pretty much all of them. There is something about going to a live concert, I guess. But, with film, are you into music? You can put music in films. Are you into making beautiful images? You can put that in a movie. If you're into dancing, if you're into acting, like all the different stuff, writing stories, it just sort of encapsulates all the art forms into one. And there's so much teamwork that goes into making a film, as opposed to you can sit in your basement and record an album on your guitar. Or the Nine Inch Nails guy, I think he made his first album just entirely by himself. And there's something cool about that. A lot of bands have more of a team process, but film is a collaboration on a whole nother level. And I think that's really cool. And some of my takeaways from the IMDb top 100, other than that film critics can be overrated, because there's some movies that I thought, I don't get why this is a thing.
Yeah.
Why people, I think there's some movies that people see and it's so confusing and artsy that they're like, I better give this a good review, otherwise people are going to think I'm stupid. Whereas I'd just say, no, that's a bad movie, my man. If you don't understand it, if you're not tracking with it, just say that.
Right.
And you got to keep your audience.
Yeah.
And second, it was really enlightening to see there's films from all across the world and all different time periods. There's American films, there's Korean films, there's Iranian, such an American, Iran. Yeah. And so it's neat to see how different cultures tell stories and what's important to them, and what's important to them in storytelling as well, and the things they value and how they convey that. And I felt like it just gave a broader perspective of the world. Like this, stories are the foundation of really how we learn. Most people don't learn all that well through, even the way a lot of schools set up are so, multiple choice, ABC, it's just these memorization of facts. And I was good at memorizing and regurgitating for tests, but I wasn't really learning anything. Whereas stories, you're processing it because there's real human examples. And I think learning through more of a story format is so much more impactful, or ideally through just experience. But if you're not going to have experience, sort of focusing on, telling a story of something that someone else did. Because if I listen to a podcast or something like that, where it's too, sometimes people get so talking about ideas for so long, and I'll think, man, I got to bring this back to earth. Like, how does this relate to any of my day-to-day life? How can I apply this? And so
and I think that goes back to the beginning of what we know as human civilization. We talk about religion or just history in general. The storytelling, the oral traditions of those civilizations are some of the reason why we know some of the things we do today. So I think that movies are just kind of an extension of that.
Yeah. when people ask what I do for a living, I'll say the oldest profession in the world, which, contrary to popular belief, is not prostitution,
Okay.
but it is storytelling. Because there was always the village elder, like telling stories around the campfire, and those stories were what brought the community together. And I think one of the issues with society right now is we don't really have a common story to rally around. I should say specifically in America. There's so much division because a lot of our religious ties have kind of faded away for a lot of good reasons, and a lot of our Americanism, what's that called? Patriotism has sort of faded away. Like most people our age that I know might like America more or less, but there's not a whole lot of just diehard patriots.
Mm-hmm.
And because of how the way things have become, and so there's not really a unifying narrative that we're all like, yeah, I'm a part of this thing. We're all part of a bigger team and a bigger story. And I don't exactly know what that should be,
Mm-hmm.
but it's an interesting exploration and something that I did explore a lot. I did a film class 2 years ago, and that was just on that, trying to connect how to make meaning of the world through film and storytelling. And I made a video for it, so I was just going to play it and then we'll talk some about it. Storytelling is a waning art form, but it still exists perhaps most vibrantly in the world of cinema. I've become more and more convinced over time that the fundamental fabric of the universe isn't logic and science and cold, calculated fact, but rather story and soul and wonder at the great mystery of life and the beauty of it. And that's the aim of drama, to tell a story that makes us contemplate our place in the world. As I've studied film, I've learned this language of symbolism and allegory and imagery that artists use to convey a message, and it's really unlocked the language of ancient stories for me as well, like those in the Bible or the Bhagavad Gita or Gilgamesh, which is why I've decided to put together this cinema and sacred text class. It's a weekly class on Thursdays this fall, and the format is 1 week we'll just watch a movie and have a screening and share initial reactions, and then the next week we'll have a short lecture and a guided conversation on how that film and the way that it told its story parallels with an ancient story. There are really 3 main goals of this class. 1, just to spread the love of film as an art form, and especially after the pandemic, to bring back movies as a communal experience again instead of watching something at home alone. And 2, to teach the language of story and symbolism and hopefully breathe some vibrance into old stories we may have heard when we were younger, but only through the lens of a dry, dead literalism. Because many of us grew up spending more time defending, say, a literal Adam and Eve than we did pondering what the story meant from a perspective of human experience and psychology. And we'll stay mostly in the early biblical stories and Genesis, because those are the ones most of us in American culture are familiar with, and the only ones I've studied quite enough to feel qualified to teach on. And even though we'll be in the Bible, this is not a Christian class per se, but more a class through the lens of art history and literature and anthropological evolution, which is what brings me to my last goal, number 3, which is in teaching the language of symbolism. I hope to build a bridge of communication between predominant modern worldviews in the West of Judeo-Christian perspectives and more secular humanist perspectives, because a lot of these conversations revolve around the Bible and the story it's trying to tell, and figuring out our place in the story of the universe right now. And both American Christians and humanists are pretty illiterate when it comes to what the Bible really is and where it came from and what the ancient stories have meant traditionally, because we've been trapped in the letter of this modern, hyper-literalistic vision of the texts. And to be honest, this class is a way for me to explore some of these questions for myself with other people, because for the past several years I felt suspended between, on one hand, some form of mystical Christianity, and on the other hand, a borderline agnostic humanism. And these camps tend to talk past one another because we make these caricatures of each other. Materialists humanists tend to attack the worst forms of Christian fundamentalism, and Christians tend to attack the worst forms of materialist humanism. And it seems like it'd make more sense to say, let's take the best of what all of us have to offer and try to make some sense out of it together. Because a lot of us are suffering from the fallout of feeling as though mainstream religion has failed us while not finding much better solutions in the nihilistic and hedonistic Rick and Morty and party and pop star world that we live in now. So I can really think of no better medium to push this conversation forward than through drama and film and dialogue, learning about stories, about history, about symbolism, so that eventually we could maybe come closer together again as a society under a common story and a shared vision. So I hope that all made at least some sense, and I hope you'll consider joining us for this cinematic and sacred journey. Yeah, which any reflection on some of those thoughts or ideas?
It just confirms what I said starting out, that you are the film expert here and I'm the guy. Yeah, I think I came to one or two of those sessions. I didn't make a bunch of them, but
no worries.
Yeah, maybe you can teach me something here.
Well, it's like whiskey, sharing whiskey. Right. It's like not a thing you teach. Yeah. It's like, I like this. Do you like this? Yeah. Let's talk about it. But yeah, that experience was very impactful for me to get to explore such intense ideas. Like one of the movies we watched was The Seventh Seal, which is it is pretty artsy, but is I think 1960 or some Swedish film, and it's pretty metal for its time. Like there's a point where there's this character who's sort of a cynic throughout it, and there's a guy praying to God, asking for deliverance, and the cynic guy is telling him, God's not listening to your prayers. You need to stop doing this and wasting your time. And then there's another point where they're burning a witch alive because it's the Middle Ages or something. And the witch is saying these incantations and calling out to the devil. And the cynic guy is saying, the devil's not listening to you either. And it's like, holy shit, that is metal. Like, yeah. That's a really intense thing to just...
For the 60s.
Yeah, especially.
Right.
And so... yeah, we had a long conversation about that. If, for one, if there is a God and what he or she or it may look like in the world and how it interacts with the world or doesn't, like, is it more hands-off kind of approach because you don't see a whole lot of parting seas and whatnots anymore. And so it was just really helpful to get together with friends and experience art together and have conversations. And I think really I came out of it. It sounds cheesy to say a new person, but it kind of was really influential in me just coming to a point of peace, of basically getting to the end of it and saying, you know what? I don't know anything and I need to stop trying so hard to figure out everything because it's just making me depressed. And there's people way smarter than me that have been thinking about these things for literally centuries, literally millennia. And to think that I'm going to be the guy who figures it all out is a bit pretentious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're just along for the ride, enjoying.
Yeah. Which for you, what was a movie, or it could be a TV show or whatever, that you feel like was one of the first ones that kind of rocked your world, where you're like, whoa.
Yeah, this one is kind of my Roman Empire. Have you heard that like trend going on? How often do men think about the Roman Empire? Mine is The Matrix. I think about this a lot, and we touched on this yesterday, texting back and forth just about the craziness of life. But I watched that. I don't even remember when it came out, like 01 or something.
I think it was 99.
Was it? Oh yeah, it was 99. Yeah, so I was 7 years old.
Yeah,
7 or 8, and I still remember the family friend's house that we watched it at. Like all the adults were in there watching it, and they allowed me to watch it, and so I did. And it was over my head, but it just seemed like the coolest thing ever because there was action and robots and Mr. Smith and all the Oracle and all these things that I thought were really cool. it kind of made me fall in love with sci-fi, which I still love today. But yeah, I often go back to just like, as I'm, 30 years old and still just trying to figure out what the hell life is, I think a lot about that Matrix and kind of how that symbolism, like you were talking about, how that plays out and what that looks like, and what in our world, especially the Western world, is Matrix, and what is real and what's true. And I think that's kind of what we're after with this podcast. So the Matrix was that first like mind blower that was just like, whoa, what if something that's not materialistic and normal is real and good and awesome? What if life is really more mind blowing than we can imagine?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of my breakthrough movie at 7 or 8.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I completely remembered the first time I saw The Matrix, also at a friend's house because I was 7.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first rated R movie I'd seen, so that was a little intense.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just an experience. And it's neat to think back through watching movies and where you were and the people you were with. And I keep a little journal of some movies that I watch with friends, because you just have a neat conversation afterwards and you don't want to forget. Even if you just have one bullet point that helps you, blossom out, like, oh yeah, that was the time that this happened and he said this. And for me, it was probably The Dark Knight. Of just, I didn't know anything about it before going in. I mean, I knew it was a Batman movie, but
right.
I hadn't seen any trailers, because I would have been 15 maybe, and I'd gone to the theater and it was sold out. And so I actually this was my 15-year-old logic. I just took $8 or whatever at the time and stuck it on one of the like tables and just went in, snuck around and went in, because I thought there's got to be someone who doesn't
stand in the back. Right?
Yeah. And so who knows? They probably didn't even get that money. Some guy came by and grabbed it, I'm sure. And
you did your part.
I tried my best.
Yeah.
I'll say 10 Hail Nolans to atone for my sins. But yeah, I went in there and I just remember the end of it. It was the only time I just seen a crowd go nuts at the end, where it ends and has the big dramatic ending, and then it says The Dark Knight, and everyone's like, yeah, and stands up and just cheers.
Yeah, you don't see that much anymore.
Yeah, and so it was neat. I'm sure some things have happened like that with the Avengers movies, maybe. But it was a neat experience, just feeling like you were a part of a story and you just embarked on this journey with 100 people in this room. And so that was the first one that really made an impact on me. And I thought, wow, I kind of like movies.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone likes a good old movie, but it really hit me in a different way.
Yeah, I will say, like, the darkness of that movie really struck me. One thing I'm learning about now in therapy is like this theory of like the parts of me, like, and you kind of break down. There's this guy inside of me, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and you can kind of sit down and have like a round table discussion with these parts of you and work things out. That's been really helpful in therapy. But one thing that has come from that is there are no bad parts of you. And so I think one thing in movies like The Dark Knight, or like a show like Peaky Blinders, or something that's shot really dark, and it's kind of the main character and really the guy you're rooting for is not maybe the best guy. But I think watching those has really allowed me to play out like that dark side of me, like that guy, because he's in there, and I often suppress him and shun him, and I don't let him come to that round table discussion. But being able to watch those things and really play that out, and really just give myself to that darkness, so to speak, for that 2 hours or 2.5 hours, is really special, and it connects to me in a way that I often don't connect with myself, probably. So yeah, that's another aspect of watching those movies that has really impacted my life.
Yeah, sometimes the darkness it gives you an example of what not to be that stays in your mind. Like, this probably sounds awful, but I think about the movie Hereditary fairly often. Did you ever see that?
I don't think so.
It'll mess you up.
Is that a horror movie? I'm not a big horror.
I'm not a big horror movie, but it's more the psychological horror until the very end, and it's just full on horror. But it's more a family drama of the family experiencing the death of of various loved ones, and it's just about like the traits that pass down from generation to generation, and I would say trying to break those cycles, but it just kind of is a downward spiral. Okay. It's not one of the movies where you get to the end and there's some sort of resolution that you feel really good about. But I think about it because I think of kind of how awful the mom is in the movie and how those things can be in me. I kid you not, I thought about it today where I was sitting down on the ground because my kids were playing a bit, and I was just trying to text somebody, and my kid was trying to talk to me, and I was trying to send this text, and then I felt like all morning I was just telling him, hey, don't do that, stop doing that, and stop like putting this bucket on your sister's head, and she doesn't like that. And it was just all, don't do this. And then I wasn't paying attention to him, and he was trying to play with me, and I thought, man, it's not like I'm going to descend into this demonic cult like in Hereditary, but just thinking, these things are going to have lasting consequences over time, and I really can't think that I'm above A plus B equals C. I can't think that if I'm doing these things and I'm not paying attention, that things are just going to turn out all right with our relationship, because I'm so confident that I can I don't know, have the right conversations or have the right thing. It's the day by day interactions that really matter, and that comes into play, I think, a lot too. On that same note about the movie There Will Be Blood, which sounds like a horror movie, but isn't really. It's just about an oil businessman and a preacher in a 1900s, early 1900s, sort of vying for power. And I see so much of myself in those characters of just, it's basically a movie on male vice in particular, of just trying to accumulate power and wealth and attention, and was really impactful for me to just think, I can see myself becoming that person where you're just this old recluse who hates everybody, and not just has all this resentment towards life and society, and that could easily be me. I could just say, peace out, I'm done with all of you, I hate all you people, I'm going to go live out in a cabin in the woods and just do my own thing. I mean, there's people who live in cabins in the woods who are great, but not if you're just sitting out there bubbling with resentment.
Into the Wild style, Into the Wild was another one of those movies that really impacted me, and I think about often too, because I'm like, maybe I'll just run away from society and live in a bus out there somewhere, hasn't happened yet, but
not yet.
It still comes up every now and
then. There's always the chance.
You never know. If I can convince Laura to go live in the bus.
Hey, I mean, I'm sure to get away from a bit, think of it like a retreat.
Yeah.
Just, hey, honey, we're going on a retreat.
We'll figure out when we're coming back later.
Yeah. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. I got us. What about does any movie or show come to mind that just made you really happy?
Yes. I wasn't ready for that question, and most of these that I have listed are not happy movies. So I have a theme. I have a theme going on.
I feel you.
But one of the shows that I really loved and was bummed that I think there is a second season. I've only seen season 1. I just found that out today in my research. But it's called Dirk Gently. Sorry, I always want to say Dirk Bentley.
Yeah, that's what I was
saying. And it's not that. It's not Dirk Bentley. It's Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency.
Okay.
Elijah Wood is in it. It's hilarious, but it's kind of a sci-fi fantasy, but there's a lot of really fun humor. It's not a serious show at all, but there are some serious themes. So it's kind of a blend of all the things that I love. There's some comedy, there's some sci-fi, fantasy, there's a lot of humor that's off the wall. The characters are really quirky and funny. So highly recommend. Check it out.
Okay. You've got another one?
Yeah, the other one I was thinking about was, I don't know if you ever saw the YouTube video back in the day, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On.
Yes.
Okay, so
Classic.
A24, I'm sure you're familiar with
Yeah.
that company. They made a full-length movie. It's only an hour and a half,
Wow.
but it has really good reviews. I don't know what the IMDb is. The Rotten Tomato is really high. It's like 98, 95, something like that. But it's really deep. It's about Marcel the Shell with shoes on, and he lives with his Nana Connie.
All right.
And their pet, what is he? Lint. He's like a piece of lint that is their pet. But he tackles a lot of. Actually, I'm not even really sure if it's a he or a she, but Marcel tackles a lot of really big issues, and I think it would be a great movie to watch with your kids, if you have kids. But it's really cool, and it actually like made Laura and I tear up at times. But it's really special, really cute, really well done.
Yeah, there's a lot of kids movies that are way underrated, not just by a ranking system, but just by society in general. Like Coco. Did you ever see Coco?
I did. Like that one.
Wrecked me.
Yeah.
Of just like the family tie and just, I don't know, it does something to you. Sound of Music was another one. I just saw, we were in Austria for like 20 minutes because we were on the border of Italy and Austria, but we were like, we should watch The Sound of Music, and because it's set in Austria, and I knew it was a classic, but I wasn't prepared for how good it was going to be, and just so wholesome and inspiring. And they do one of those switcheroos where, have you ever seen it?
Not beginning to end.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just saw it. People were like, you haven't seen The Sound of Music? You're into film stuff? And it's like, sorry. But basically there's all of these songs, it's a musical, but then it's one of those where they sing these songs, but then in the second half of the movie, they sing the same songs, but they have a totally different meaning that's more serious because they're in a different context. And, like the first time the father of the family, they try to get him to sing a song at bedtime because they're just messing with dad, like, sing us a song. And he plays Edelweiss, which I think is the Austrian national anthem, maybe, is what I was assuming.
Okay.
And it's just a nice little guitar song. And it's just, he's singing this sweet song to the kids and they go to bed. But then later on, he performs it at this big show that the Nazis have taken over and are, making sure that nothing goes out of place. And it's more this patriotic, like, I'm going to stand my ground. I'm not going to join your forces. And it's the exact same song, but totally different feeling. And they do that with several songs. And so that was one that just made me feel real good at the end. What about just a sad, not necessarily like a dark contemplative. We talked about some of that, but just like a sense of melancholy or something.
The Lobster is a good one.
I've heard about that, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's, I guess it's an alternate universe in the future. And if you're a single person, there's something wrong with you. You should be with someone, you should be married, you should be partnered. And so all of the people that are of a certain age that are still single are sent to this facility. It's kind of like a mental health facility, and they have, a certain amount of time to find their partner, or they will be turned into an animal of their choice. So that's where the title, The Lobster, comes from. Okay. It's really interesting. It dives into a lot of mental health issues and how people view mental health issues. Not really a feel good story, but it was one that made me think. But yeah, definitely sad. Yeah. This wasn't super relatable for me. I kind of didn't even think of one for this, but off the top of my head, there's one called Requiem for a Dream, which sounds sad because it's like your death song for your dreams, but it's just about drug addicts, and it's the most effective anti-drug PSA ever out there. And you see that and you'll just think, no way in hell I'm doing any of this stuff. And yeah, you just feel sad at the end where you think, wow, I just watched these 4 people's lives get destroyed by drugs. And but then it's almost redemptive in a way where
think, but I'm not going to do that.
Mhm.
That's the
Now I
takeaway.
know.
Don't do meth, kids. Yeah, I heard it first here. And then, what about a movie that really, or show that really shaped the way you saw the world? You talked about The Matrix already, but any that
Sure.
come to mind that did that?
Shrinking was a good one. That was a show on Apple TV that has a lot of ties to the tools that we've talked
Yeah.
about previously. It's kind of based off of Phil Stutt's life, loosely, Harrison Ford's character. And yeah, so it was kind of as I was going through the tools and reading that book and kind of seeing this play out. But it's just about the lives of these therapists and how, like, messed up and normal they all are. And so, yeah, it was just interesting. It was right about the time I was starting therapy, learning this philosophy of therapy, and just was really good acting, really good comedy, but also tackles a lot of big issues just with family and friends and life and death. So it's good.
Yeah. It's hard to pick one for me because it's not like there's just been endless ones, but there's been probably 10 that I can think of a very particular experience and a very particular idea that really changed the way that I saw most things in the world. A big one was No Country for Old Men, because one of the main themes was just, hey, you think the world's crazy right now and that it's getting worse, but it's always been this way. And that was really influential because I think the way I was raised and just the culture I was raised in was very doom and gloom, like everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And now I just don't see it that way at all. I just see a lot of potential for the future and do know there's a lot of problems and plenty of problems. But I think just about anyone, if you ask them, would you rather live now or would you rather live in 1500? They'd mostly pick now.
Right.
And that says something about where we've come as a species. And so, yeah, that was really, there's another scene in that film where one of the main characters is sort of getting lectured by his uncle about that whole thing and just saying, it's vanity to think that everything's revolving around you and your life's the worst that it is, and that your life is crazy and you're having to deal with all this stuff that no one else has had to deal with, and just kind of saying there's nothing new under the sun. And that was impactful because obviously you can tell I saw that when I was in a life season of a lot of depression. And obviously you can't just tell a person who's depressed, like, hey, it's not about you, man up, because that's not how you just solve depression.
Yeah.
But I was at the point in that cycle where hearing that way really helped me to think, you know what, that's right. Like, I need to be done with this. I need to, not that you can just say, okay, I'm done. Well, all done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, whatever. But I thought, my life I've got a lot of things that are going well. I need to look at those things, invest in those things, not be always thinking that the world has conspired to create this grand tragedy that is Andrew Power's life. And not be so conceited about that. And another one that was really relatable for me was Banshees of Inisherin, which just came out last year, and it's got Colin Farrell and some guys in it. It was a little too artsy for me, especially how it gets to the end. Did you see it by chance?
I watched parts of it, and then I saw what was supposed to be an ending.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not a movie that I'd just say, oh, this is one of my faves. But it did really affect me of just basically the plot line is that two good friends in this small island in Ireland, one of them decides he doesn't want to be friends with the other guy anymore because he's like, I want to do things with my life, and all you're doing is just telling these nonsensical stories at the bar about your life and random things that happen to you, and I don't want that anymore. Like, I want to make a symphony, I want to do all these things, and the other guy is arguing from the point of like, my mother was a sweet person and I remember her even though she never wrote a symphony, even though she's not going to be in any history books. Like, she made an impact on me. And so it's just a lot of ideas to ponder because I feel very driven and want to do something. And it's not even that I want to be somebody. I'm sure there's probably some pride in there that everyone kind of wants to be someone,
Sure.
but you just want to do something that you feel like is resounding with people, resonating, and because that would show that what you're doing is meaningful.
Yeah.
And so that one was impactful.
Yeah.
Just another broad film topic that I'd love to hear some of your opinions. Don't want to get too deep into politics. It's kind of the opposite of that. But I think people put too much emphasis on changing the world through politics when it seems like art really changes a lot of culture and politics more than people realize. And politics legislation usually ends up being the last thing in the rung of social change that's catching up to all these movements of before the art. There's the people who are just basically anything that needs to change in society starts with people who are being kind to one another and loving and helping people understand. And like MLK, instead of hating all these people that were hating them, saying, turn the other cheek, and people having to see, man, we're doing all these awful things to these African Americans and they're just being kind to us in return. And then they feel like trash because that's what their actions are reflecting. Like, man, that isn't good. And then you have these movies and films and art, like To Kill a Mockingbird came out before the I Have a Dream speech, which just sort of puts things in context. And which another fun fact I learned over the holidays this past year was that song, Oh Holy Night, is a really famous hymn. It has the verse about chains shall he break, for the slave is our brother. And that was written pre-Civil War. And so it was a really like stick it to the man song. And there's just things like that are cool. If you don't realize how much art is influencing society, and then it eventually catches up to the top rungs, but it seems to start on the grassroots through love and expression.
Sure.
Anyway, I'm kind of rambling.
No, that's all good. Your reflections. You're preaching to me. What was the question?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know. Just what do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think sometimes now that line is crossed a little bit and movies are a little too political, or maybe if the movie itself is not supposed to be, it's labeled with that. I think there were a couple movies that came out in this past year that were kind of controversial because of that, and I had no problem with them. But you get these movements behind it that label it as one thing or the other, and then before you even go watch it, you've already got the idea made up in your head, or these people ruffle my feathers. I'm not going to participate in that. I'm not going to give them my money or my time. I'm just going to rail against it on Facebook or whatever the case is, just by example there.
Yeah.
But I do think it is really powerful, like you said, when you can create these stories that put someone in a different, in someone else's shoes. Because I think people that may seem totally different from the outside looking in, like, you take a hardcore Republican, you take a resistance fighter in the Middle East, you take a whatever middle-aged Democrat dad. Like, I think all of these people will tell you they're doing the things they're doing for the same reasons. It's family, it's friends, it's their loved ones, it's for a better life, whatever it is. So I think if you can put that person in the other person's shoes for just a second, they'll go, oh, okay, this is me just in a different time, in a different place with the different surroundings. But I think that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, there's some Martin Scorsese quote about that, about how that's what he loves so much about film, is it's like an opportunity to stand in someone else's shoes for 2 hours and realize like, oh, wow, I had no idea that's what you went through. And that's such a powerful and formative human experience, because you can't be everywhere, you can't do everything, you can't even meet all the different kinds of people. And so just realizing how many different kinds of people they are and what they have to go through, and trying to be kind to everyone, because you've just seen enough of like, oh, this kind of person or that kind of person had to experience that, and you never want to be that kind of person. It's on the wrong side of history.
Right. And I think there's a part that comes out of that tells us never say never. Like you can be in the position that you're in now and look at someone across the world and say, "Oh, that's terrible. I would never in a million years."
Yeah.
But, you know, with the same exact person that you are placed in that situation, I think it's important to say, like, yeah, at least acknowledge, like, hey, that could be me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can do that with anybody across the board, no matter who you are.
Absolutely. What's one of the most just beautiful movies you've ever seen?
The Life of Pi was a good one.
Oh, I actually haven't seen that, but I know what you're talking about because I've heard so much about it and seen little clips, and you're like, man, that's pretty.
Right. It is pretty. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of it is just on a little rowboat in the middle of the ocean, but the characters and the animals and I thought it was really beautiful.
Okay. I don't know if that's on my watch list. I'll have to add it on there. For me, it might be Blade Runner 2049. And part of why it's so good to look at is because Ryan Gosling is in it.
There you go.
Totally my man. Yeah,
as straight males, we love Ryan Gosling.
Oh, 100%.
It's Ryan Reynolds and Ryan Gosling, right? Those are like the two
Ryan
that straight
Reynolds,
males just love.
Ryan Reynolds doesn't do it for me as much, but I'll just put it this way. If I had the proper plumbing, I would totally bear his children, Ryan Gosling.
I am Yeah. Place Beyond the Pines. That's one that is
yeah.
Bradley
and but yeah, Blade Runner 2049 was just there's so many colors, and it's kind of dark too. Like the colors are sort of dark, so they pop a lot more. Or sorry, I should say the tones are kind of dark, but then the colors are bright, and that makes it pop really well. And it's just really pretty. You could watch the whole movie with the sound off, and it would be entertaining because you're just like, whoa. And I think it was Roger Deakins. I forget, there's all the film nerd stuff, who filmed it, who I want to say he was nominated for best cinematographer 12 times or something before he won on Blade Runner 2049. And he'd lost all those previous times. And so it was neat to see someone rewarded for their hard work. And it was just really pretty. What about a movie you just totally regret watching?
I don't know if regret is the right word, but I could never get through Napoleon Dynamite. I never once got through it beginning to end, and everyone loved it back in the day. That was kind of, I think we were in junior high at the time, so it was like that was our sweet spot, you would think. But I just couldn't do it. It would just, every time I tried to watch it, I'm just like, this is so dumb and slow. I can't do it.
Yeah. I hardly even remember it, but I was pretty impartial. It had its moments, but it was just so popular you couldn't escape it. You're like, where did this come from?
Even though I didn't like it, I do respect it for what it is. Like, because it is so terrible on purpose. Like, you got to respect that. They did what they set out to do there.
And I think it, just had a tiny budget because it's basically a high school project. And that's kind of neat when someone does a little personal project that really blows up. And I know for me, it would probably be Mulholland Drive. I think it's the New York Times highest rated movie of all time.
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
I can't understand why. And I'll save you the rant, but just to anyone listening, do not watch Mulholland Drive. You'll save so much of your life, and you won't have to have the frustration of thinking, what just happened? And not a good way. There's some movies where you get to the end, you're like, I'm not sure if I piece that all together. But in this one, you don't even care to piece anything together because it's just nonsense. And it's like the artsy fartsy stuff to the max. And that's the sort of stuff I want to avoid when I try to make films, is like, okay, I want to make things that people can understand, a clear story from beginning to end. And, there might be the loose ends that they're trying to figure out. But if it's all just this mess of whatever, I just hate that so much.
I think there are shows and movies that are strong enough to totally botch the ending and still be good. That's not one of them.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's like a botch from beginning to end.
Okay.
Yeah. Are there any particular experiences at a theater you remember, like with friends or with people?
One of the first ones that came to mind was, I'll never forget this because it was very sad for me, but I got broken up with in the theater mid movie of Benjamin Button. Yeah, weird movie to go to as a 13-year-old anyways, but I actually kind of like that movie. Not the point. Yeah, I got broken up with mid movie, and we were so young that we couldn't drive. So we still had to sit there.
But
and wait on our
How did this happen mid movie?
It was a very tumultuous relationship. To be honest with you, I'm not sure what was happening at this time. We broke up a couple times. It just wasn't a good situation.
Yeah.
You live and you
Junior
learn.
high love.
You live and you learn. Yeah. It was like, one of those first love situations, but I don't know what it was at this point, but I could tell something was off, I think. And the conversation just started and ended right there mid Benjamin Button, which is like a 3-hour movie. So should have waited a little bit, but yeah, we're just like standing out there together waiting on our parents to pick us up in their minivans, so that memory will never leave me.
That is super awkward.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because I have a Benjamin Button story too.
Okay.
That's almost the exact opposite of, I watched it on a plane ride that was 10 hours or something because I thought I need 3 hours to fill my time. And at the end of it, it was so, just like a guy's life from beginning to end, but from end to beginning.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, I want to have a meaningful life. And I started writing our kid a letter, and that's like a time capsule letter, and got that written out. I just wrote it on my phone and then wrote it on an actual letter later. Cause I initially tried to on the plane, but it was just like,
yeah.
So yeah, I had a very positive experience with that movie.
Good.
And I hope that one day it can be redeemed for you somehow.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to think of a theater experience. I know I've had several. Sort of forgot to think about this.
For me, it was one of the first places that I could be free. It was like the first place that my parents would take me and drop me off.
Yeah.
I wasn't alone yet. When I started dating young, we had to go with another group of friends. We had to go with a group, but just being there alone and feeling like you were a big boy, you could go buy some popcorn and hold your girlfriend's hand if you were brave enough. And yeah, it was exciting times. I think most of the memories were just spent running around outside or talking or flirting or whatever.
And more of the post-movie times were fun. Like I remembered one, what's that movie called? Is it Suburbia? Is the one with, oh my gosh, what's his name? Shia LaBeouf, where he's like, he sees a murder through
I don't know if it's Suburbia. Disturbia?
Okay.
I think it is
sounds
Disturbia.
Right. But that came out in junior high. And I just remember hanging out with friends after, because everyone's waiting for their friends to come pick them up. And that you basically just stole the words from me of, just having that independence of like, oh yeah, I'm a man here alone with all these other 13-year-olds. And
until your mom pulls up and slides that van door back.
Yeah.
And you're a kid again.
Yeah. Which I remember Orban Olsen, one of a person we know, he was there in the film and he'd never seen it before, but he was sitting beside me and the movie was so predictable. He'd just say, a guy's going to come out behind and like kill the guy. And then everything he said happened. And so that was funny. And, this is a story of just watching with friends at our place. But for my birthday party I think it was 29th, just a couple of years ago, we got together and watched a movie called The Father with Anthony Hopkins. And I was under the impression, I didn't know much about it, but I thought it was a movie about a father with dementia and his family learning to live with him. And I'd gotten vibes that it was this really hopeful, uplifting story where we watched it, ends up being him, just his descent into dementia and his family having to deal with that. And it's very well done and totally worth seeing. And it was really cool because it makes you feel like you have dementia, because it'll switch characters for the same, like actors for the same character. And you're like, wait, is that person? And it'll rearrange things in the room. And so it's creative in that way. And, but we got to the end and everyone was like, what the hell, Andrew? Like, it's your birthday.
And we're trying to have a feel good slumber party.
And, and so sometimes it just happens, but I don't read a whole lot of things until I like to see a movie
Yeah.
fresh.
So, I mean, sometimes you watch a trailer and you've watched the whole movie.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, well, I liked that, but also we just watched it.
Yeah.
So no need.
Yeah, because it'll show just an integral part of the story in the trailer,
Yeah.
and then when it's coming up to that thing, you think, "Oh, that's where this is going to happen," and you don't have that effect of wondering. But yeah, I think film just adds a lot of meaning to seeing other people's experiences, and then it works so much into culture and language of, even the Matrix, like we talked about, is so ubiquitous, and even people who haven't seen the movie know what that's about. And it's a kind of shame that in some ways it's been overtaken by like the Andrew Tate crowd trying to stay positive.
Okay.
But I think everyone could agree that he's a piece of trash. But yeah, it's the concept, I guess, of an idea. I'm sure there's other sayings whether it's a Shakespeare, referencing Shakespeare or someone, but something that's so culturally influential that it just becomes a part of the language.
Right.
I just wanted to read, this is maybe like a teaser for another conversation, but I did want to read the little bit of some of our text, not like personal stuff.
Okay.
But you're saying that you were kind of feeling like Neo going through the process of waking up in the real world, but trying to figure out what to do with it. And I said, I feel more like Neo waking up in the real world, but then being like, F this, I'm going back to sleep and enjoying the Matrix. And just the fact that we could have that conversation about something is interesting and
be on the same page and know where we're at.
Yeah, and that sounds really pessimistic. I'm not that pessimistic.
No,
but
absolutely.
We'll probably like wrap this up, and then we can talk about that some. Do another podcast sometime.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you have any other just closing thoughts on films, movies, shows?
I didn't have a lot of time to do my homework on this, but one thing that hit me even in a little bit of time that I did have was just how big of a role movies have played in my life, even if it's just about the things orbiting around the movie, playing with friends at the movie theater, or we had a babysitter and she had 2 movies on VHS. So every day my sisters and I would get off of school, she'd pick us up, we'd go there, and it was either Sandlot or Angels in the Outfield. And we still remember that. We still talk about that and remember those times fondly. I still remember one of the things that we would do with my dad was, while my mom was in the grocery store, the movie theater was right next door, and we would drive by the movie theater and they've got the posters out there, and we didn't plan on going in to see a movie. There were times where, we didn't have enough money to go see a movie as a family, but we would drive by and just see what was playing. And that was always really special, just kind of a fun little thing that I did with my dad. So some of these things hit me as I was thinking about this, that the movies are extremely impactful and have changed who I am, but the things that orbit around those movies too have been huge in my life.
Yeah, I like to have the challenge, the practical thing. And I tried to think, what are 3 movies that I'd recommend pretty universally to people that I feel like would make them a better human? Mm-hmm. And that could be mostly family friendly and just broaden your scope. And so the first one is called Harakiri, which is an older movie. I don't normally like older movies, but there's a story behind this one too. It's a Japanese movie, obviously from the title. And it's basically about a guy who's a samurai who sort of, his tribe has been disbanded. And so he's trying to get approval, because that's how it worked in their day, to commit suicide, do the suicide ritual. Mm-hmm. And you have to get approval from like a higher up authority. And as the story goes, you realize that he's actually airing out to this council all the things that they've done that destroyed his tribe, and that he's not really there to commit suicide. He's there to show them what they've done and how it's affected the poor people and their society. And it's so epic. And I watched it probably like a week or 2 after our first kid was born, because I'd have to stay up late, and he'd only sleep if I had him strapped to me. And so I just watch movies and stand up and rock. And I got relieved for bedtime duty because my wife and I would switch. She'd come in at like 1:30, and then I'd take I'd go to sleep, and she came in. I saw like 30 minutes left of the movie, and then I went out and I still finished it, even though I was exhausted, because I just thought this is so engaging, because it's just the cinematography is beautiful, even for old film. It's very symmetrical, and all the Japanese architecture. And so that was one that I just felt all around, like story wise, visually, it's just a great movie for people to see, and would be a good older movie for people to dip their toes in. And I'm definitely of the opinion that older doesn't mean better. There's a lot of film people that think that way, but in my mind, that's like saying that horse is a better method of transportation than car.
Yeah.
Like it can be fun and beautiful in its own way,
Right.
but a thing can be good regardless of where it came from.
Yeah. And what's the name of that one again?
Harakiri, Harakiri.
Okay.
And the next one would be A Hidden Life, is just about a guy, a conscientious objector in World War II who was Austrian and didn't want to fight with the Nazis. And it's just incredibly visually stunning. Another one of those where you could just shut the audio off and it would still be engaging, because you just think, how can someone make something so beautiful? I remember seeing it and almost feeling the sense of infuriation. Is that a word? Of like, are you telling me that every movie could look this good and people are just choosing not to?
Yeah.
So it's just one that's a good story. It's a little on the artsy side. There's not a whole lot of dialogue. But it's totally worth seeing, and for the sake of beauty. And then the last one is The Apartment, which is another kind of older movie, but about a guy who's climbing up the rungs of his business, and all of his higher ups are using his apartment as a rendezvous point for their affairs, and saying, well, don't you want that raise, that kind of thing. And so he lets them use it, and then they'll take too long, and he'll have to stay out in the park, and he'll get a cold and a fever because he can't go back to his apartment. And it's him kind of struggling with, trying to get these businessy people to approve of him because he really wants their approval, but then struggling with that. And it was just another one of those where I thought, man, this is just a great story, and takes so many of those plot points of, things that were said earlier in the movie, and then flips them in the end. And it's just very satisfying. So I feel like those three movies, that'd be my challenge, is I think if you watch those three movies, it'll make you a better human being.
Okay.
And so that's it. Again, we've got Rocktown Rye, peated rye, and we're here at the Mansion of the Orchard. Thanks for letting us use the space, and we will see you next time.